Hi, my name is Molly Wolfe, and today I'll be sharing my thesis work. Your guess is as good as mine, the search for memory and identity. In 1637, Rene Descartes claimed, "I think, therefore I am." Descartes said the only sure thing in this world was that he was a thinking thing, and therefore he existed. Even if an all-powerful being tried to trick him into thinking he exists when he does not, he would have to exist in the first place for the demon to deceive him. For you cannot manipulate something that does not already exist. Therefore, if you can think, you must exist. But if you exist, then who are you? The ability to think does not result in personhood. Selfhood relies directly on your ability to remember. Your current self is simply a response to a collection of memories and experiences. What happens to yourself when you cannot remember your past? Through a self-reflective lens, my work explores the relationship between memory and identity. My paintings are an exercise in memory recall and a search for everlasting identity for both my audience and myself. I consider my work to be a map to remember myself and preserve my identity. I achieve this through the use of symmetry, distortion, and symbolic imagery. I present images of animals, plants, toys, and other everyday objects that are both personal and universal. Each item I choose has a specific memory or story attached to it. These objects may symbolically contain whole stories, a vague emotion, or something as small as an inside joke. Every item, shape, or phrase I paint is carefully curated from my current surroundings and past memories to document who I am and my story, while simultaneously inviting the audience to reflect on their own memory and identities. The concepts of memory and identity in relation to objects can be seen in Figure 1, by no stretch of the imagination. Every element of the work is a part of the documentation of my identity and of my memories. The cicada shells are a visual reminder of my dad trapping them during the last wave of cicadas in the summer of 2004. The spoons represent the time my grandmother accidentally stole my aunt's silverware. The bumblebees are mementos from when my little sister used to pet them as a child. For me, memory has always been at the forefront of my identity. My grandmother was diagnosed with early onset dementia when I was 14. I spent my formative teenage years watching my mother and grandmother cope with her loss of memory, personality, and freedom. The cold, materialistic woman I had known throughout my childhood slowly became a deeply confused but affectionate grandmother. With only 21 years difference between my mother and my grandmother, I became concerned with the potential for my mother to follow the same path as my grandmother and the rest of the women from her family. And even further, I became worried for myself. Would I be cursed with the same genetic ending? My worries were not unfounded. I've never had a dependable long-term or short-term memory. In comparison to my younger sister, my memory is almost a joke. I often come to her with pieces of a memory or questions about the details of our childhood that she has to elaborate upon for me. I require constant reminders of what happened last week or last year. I always joke that my brain is on a 2-year timer. If a memory is not critical to my survival, I will forget it within 2 years. While this makes rewatching movies an enjoyable experience, I often find myself worrying about who I am. I have only a handful of memories from my childhood, most of which I believe I can only recall due to my sister's help. I frequently forget entire people, places, and conversations. By the time I finish a painting, I almost always feel disconnected from it, as if somebody else had actually painted it. Each year that passes, I feel like I have morphed into an entirely new person and identity. As I'm realizing all too well, in order to maintain a sense of self, we have to have a solid grasp on our memories. Descartes said he was a thinking thing, but that didn't mean he was a person. Identity is based on what we can consciously remember extending backward in time. A person who remembers nothing of his or her past has lost their own identity. A person whose memories are altered or whose memory is failing them has no solid basis for their identity. Your sense of self can only be maintained by a continuous, dependable mind. Otherwise, your identity will be forced to adapt to fit the present circumstances. In an essay concerning human understanding, John Locke stated that he believed the qualifications for selfhood were, quote, a thinking, intelligent being that has reason and reflection and can consider itself as itself the same thinking thing in different times and places. Following this logic, a person with dementia or dramatic memory loss, such as my grandmother, would constantly need to reinvent themselves based on what they did or did not remember that day. With memory stripped away, your identity relies solely on your genetics rather than any learned experiences. By the age of 65, about 1 in 9 people will experience significant memory loss. Most everyone knows somebody with either dementia or Alzheimer's. It is not out of the ordinary to worry about our futures and our minds, especially as we age. Therefore, it is ubiquitous for people to turn to objects such as toys, photographs, or other collections as a tool for memory recall. The idea of using art or objects to hold memories is a universal tradition. Souvenirs, for example, are bought as physical reminder of a trip or of a vacation. Almost everyone has a collection of postcards, pins, and little jars of sand and seashells to help remember every honeymoon or family getaway. Many parents will scrap or keep memory boxes of their children. My mother has a quilted house that opens up and displays all of my siblings and my baby teeth and locks of hair in little plastic bags. She keeps this house next to a collection of tiny porcelain dolls from my aunt in my childhood bedroom. My grandmother, on the other hand, kept many collections. From Sudoku puzzles and nutcrackers to greeting cards, these collections became her whole personality in the early days of her illness. Each room in her house would have different themes. Her kitchen was covered in roosters, her laundry room in Amish antiques, her guest bedroom in family heirlooms such as old quilts and the family Bible. As her memory failed her, she clung to keeping these collections as much as she possibly could, even when she could no longer remember why. When it came time to move her to a much smaller nursing home apartment, the process of separating my grandmother from her collections was incredibly challenging and painful. Even though many of the objects were worthless, and the ones that were important heirlooms were stored away, it felt like by taking these objects from our grandmother, we were only aiding the dementia. Historically, people have kept collections similar to my grandmother's. During the Victorian era, mourning jewelry was popularized to help preserve the memory of the dead. Locks of hair would be elegantly weaved into lockets or bracelets and ornately decorated with gems, gold, and pearls. Similar to these, churches also keep reliquaries. These incredibly ornate relics hold bones, hair, and other bits of clothing from saints and other religious figures as a means of remembering them. Although each person's collections may look different than these gaudy examples or your grandmother's assortment of Hallmark angel figurines, everyone keeps objects for nostalgia or memories in some way. To maintain our collective history and memory as a society, we keep museums, preserve historic neighborhoods, and Civil War battlefields. We pass down family recipes and heirlooms. Younger generations in particular have also taken to using social media such as Instagram or Pinterest to keep a sort of digital, more portable memory bank. In whatever form it may take, these objects, things, and collections help us hold on to our past and remember who we are. With my memory failing me, my artwork became my own version of my grandmother's collections. In the same way that her antiques and nutcrackers held her memories for her, my paintings also encapsulate my own memories and give them a physical home. The canvas and paint elevate my memories and suspend them frozen in time, making the paintings themselves a physical manifestation of my past. Using my paintings as a physical reminder of my memories stem not only from responding to various collections and souvenirs, but also from my interest in 17th century Dutch vanitas and Memento Mori paintings. This genre of still life painting presents elaborate compositions of candles, skulls, and rotting fruit to symbolize the inevitability of death. The paintings would be hung as reminders to stop overindulgence and to maintain good behavior. The practice of assigning objects a purposeful, symbolic meaning inspired an essential component of my paintings, leading me to use my own disparate elements to represent my memories. While Memento Mori paintings serve as a reminder of impending death, my work uses the same devices to do the opposite, remember life. Whereas in a vanitas painting, a piece of fruit would represent time passing, the same fruit in my work is assigned to hold a memory. The peaches, for example, in If My Memory Serves Me Well, Then It Was the Gerbil, bring to mind the rows of fruit trees on the far edge of my parents' property. However, my compositional choices are not only inspired by Memento Mori paintings. During the 1920s, psychologist Herman Rorschach developed the controversial but intriguing Rorschach test, which has also heavily influenced my work. This psychological test entails a set of perfectly symmetrical but ambiguous inkblots be shown to a patient who must describe what they see. As Dr. Mike Drayton writes, quote, by asking the person to tell you what they see in the inkblot, they are actually telling you about themselves and how they project meaning onto the real world. If two people looking at the same inkblot describe it as seeing a butterfly versus, say, two skulls, the test would indicate one person is happy and good-natured while the other is disturbed. By telling others what you see in the ink, you expose elements of your personality and personal meaning. People will inevitably inject themselves into the Rorschach inkblots, exposing imagery relevant to themselves. In order for my audience to relate to my work, I utilize the imagery of the Rorschach both directly and indirectly. Pattern and symmetry similar to the structure of the inkblot test play an essential role in my compositional process. I organize the visual elements of my paintings to mirror the Rorschach. The disparate elements framed in symmetry act as a Rorschach themselves, inviting the viewer to insert themselves into the ambiguous imagery to find meaning. This use of symmetry and distortion in reference to the Rorschach can be seen in my painting, I Have Bigger Fish to Fry. The elements are reflected vertically and horizontally, echoing the Rorschach inkblot design in the background. In combination with symmetry, each object also has specific memories associated with them. The long-finned fish remind me of my sister's aquarium stationed in the corner of our family room. At the same time, the lilies evoke the memory of the spring flowers popping up along the side of the milk house in my parents' backyard. However, Rather than focusing on deciphering my relation to the objects in the painting, the intent is to remind the viewers of their own memories. The Rorschach design behind the imagery is a call for the viewer to place themselves into the narrative of the work and find meaning in it. My painting's ability to trigger a sense of familiarity and nostalgia is essential when understanding my work. Although the images presented will not make viewers recall the same stories as I do, the compositional arrangements will make each person consider their own connections to the objects and the memories they personally associate with them. Like the Rorschach test, my work engages the audience by asking them to reflect on their past and insert themselves into the narrative of my work. Personally, I see my artwork as a pathway to remembering myself. The beauty of my paintings is their permanence. They will not fade or change the way memories do. Whether housed in a museum or a dusty old storage locker, my artwork will outlast me, my mother, and my grandmother. The art I make will always exist in a fixed state where I can reference it, like a memento mori or a souvenir. Ultimately, my paintings are an exercise in memory recall and a search for a continuous identity for both me and my audience. In the war against time and disease, my work is a collective attempt at fighting back. As Descartes put it, I hope to move beyond a thinking thing to being a person with a stable and reliable identity. Through the repetition of making these paintings and remembering them, I hope to maintain my sense of self as time passes and avoid the same fate as my grandmother. So I ask again, what happens to yourself when you cannot remember your past? At the end of the day, your guess is as good as mine. Thank you so much.